Welcome to Wheel of Mind, the Wheel of Time point of view reread podcast. This season, we're reading Matt Cawthon's perspective. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 13. I'm your co-host, Lajaradain of the White Aja.
Hi, and I'm Giskel Cimaris, a scholar from Ilion. And just like Lojara said, this is our lucky 13th episode of Season 2, and I'm planning a party. In fact, I've got 13 S&I coming over later. They each said they were bringing a murderall. I think that's a joke. Anyway, I guess they're supplying the snacks. They told me not to worry about it. Anyway, it's time for our obligatory spoiler warning. So if you've not read this entire series, be warned that we will drop spoilers of any time without any further announcements. So proceed at your own risk. Much like my parties.
I really love that intro. All right, so Giskel, why don't you get us started with Chapter 42?
All right, thank you. So Chapter 42, entitled Before the Arrow, begins with our old friend Matt Cawthon lying in his tent, studying over his options to leave. He should be studying the definition of the word irony instead, as his thoughts lead into being Ta'veren and how, quote, a man ought to be able to find profit in something like that. Rand certainly had. And also, he himself had never even noticed anything twisting around him except the fall of dice. It was just that he seemed to be stuck with all the burdens of being Ta'veren and none of the pleasure. End quote. Matt had just made up his mind to go, slowly. Since being in Tyr, he had begun to be able to talk about leaving. Then, he'd begun being able to make plans for it, and now he knew he could actually do it without the twinge of being pulled back into Rand's orbit against his will. Now it was finally time for him to get away before somebody put a spear through him in this war. Matt walked up to Rand's tent to tell him that he was leaving, only to find that Rand was gone. Jason Natail was there. To take his mind off of how uncomfortable Natail made him, Matt began poking around, looking at some of the large maps that Rand had left laid out on the floor near the fire pit. Matt felt grim as he saw the disposition of the armies. Couladin surrounding Cairhien with 160,000 Shaido, and near that many a number among the other four clans following behind them, those who had not yet declared their intentions toward Rand. Lan surprised him by speaking. Matt had not even heard him enter the tent. Studying the map himself, Lan asked a few questions. When Matt was not forthcoming, Lan asked Natail, "So should we rush down on Couladin with everything and crush him tomorrow?" Slowly, Matt stood looking at the map and started telling what he would do. In fact, the more he looked at the map and considered it as a problem, the more intriguing it became to him. It was the ultimate gamble, with lives as the wager instead of gold. Getting caught up in what he was seeing in his mind's eye, he quickly outlined possible battle strategies, outlining where to place men to cover the flanks and the rear in case the uncommitted clans came up against them. Lan mentioned that it was a good plan, unless all four of the uncommitted clans come at them at once and change things. And here's a quote from the story. Matt laughed aloud. "Everything always changes. The best plan lasts until the first arrow leaves the bow." End quote. And there, of course, we understand now the title of the chapter, Before the Arrow. Matt clicked his mouth shut and realized what he'd been saying when Natail's harp suddenly went silent, the man staring at Matt. Only then did he realize that Rand had also entered the tent. In a rush, Matt told him that he would be leaving at first light, as soon as the sun was up. This was not his fight. He had to look out for himself. And here's another quote. "This isn't for me, Rand. I don't know anything about battles, and I don't want to know." Matt was surprised when Rand wished him well. Matt had obviously expected for Rand to ask him to stay, but instead explained that he had never tried to make him stay, neither Matt nor Perrin. And why was Natail suddenly playing a song with such an ironic sound? What was that all about? Anyway, wishing each other well and clasping hands, Matt felt a little sad at leaving, and also felt a little foolish for feeling sad. Showing himself out of the tent, Matt took a moment to glare at some of the Tyran lords who were waiting on Rand, just to taunt them a bit. Then he went away, whistling Dance with Jack of the Shadows.
Thanks, that was a great synopsis. I love this chapter. So the battle strategy scene is really iconic. It's one of those moments about Matt that really always stood out to me.
Yes.
But this read through, I found myself drawn to a really close reading of everything before that too. So, in this chapter we spend so much time in Matt's thoughts, processing what's happened to him so far, and we don't often get to do that.
Right.
He finally gets some time to kind of breathe and make sense of some things. Now he's not enjoying that time to himself. I certainly do, just for the character analysis potential. We got a lot of material here.
Yes, a lot of things to work on since we get inside his head for an extended period of time without a lot of action.
Mm-hmm.
As he's laying there in the tent, just studying his options on leaving, thinking about it, we get this quote. I know I've thrown a lot of Matt quotes into this one, but there's so many there, so rich.
Oh, yeah.
But this quote, "I'm no bloody hero, and I'm no bloody soldier." And then he even starts analyzing that. Well, those other men whose memories I've got, they were soldiers, but that's not me.
Mm-hmm.
That's them. That's what the foxes gave me, but that's not me. I'm no bloody soldier. And he has no desire to be.
Mm-mm.
The desire for fame, for glory, all of the things that Meladrin was, I think it's her name.
Melindra.
His girlfriend. Melindra, thank you. Yeah, that Melindra, all the things that she talked to him about. Okay, we've already discussed her, kind of echo the things Celine had said before. They focused so much on the glory and coming out of the shadow of the dragon reborn and being his own man. Yet that's just not Matt. He just doesn't care for that stuff. All of the things that make little boys get excited about war are completely gone here.
Yeah. He used to be interested in battles. He said that in the very beginning of the Eye of the World. Battles interest me. Now,
Right.
Not so much,
No. and even though he's not really experienced a lot of battles personally, he's been in some Trolloc fights and in fact, come to think of it, a lot of sudden Trolloc attacks.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Maybe he's more battle hardened than I realized. But if we stop and count those up, but he's not eager at all for that. And realistically, those people who have never seen war generally are more eager for it than those who have seen it.
Mm-hmm.
There are plenty of veterans who are willing to do whatever it takes, but that doesn't mean they're eager for it. It doesn't mean they really want that.
Right. The only time Matt shows any real eagerness or that he's interested in it is when he's puzzling out the strategy. It's a puzzle for him. That's the part about it that he seems to enjoy, not the prospect of actually having to run people through with his spear or avoiding arrows and that kind of stuff. He's not into that type of excitement.
Right. He would be a great one to sit at the kitchen table and play a game of Risk.
Yeah.
Because he would take over the continents and he would rule the world before long. Great strategist when it comes to that, but to actually, pick up a sword and go kill somebody, he can do it, but he doesn't want to do it. In fact, the only time he will is when he's backed into a corner.
Yeah.
But I love his assessment of the armies and the way they will move and the things they will do. The fact that they had overwhelming force, they had double the number of people that Couladin did. Yet, hey, we need to hold these people back in case this happens over here and hold those people back to funnel him up toward the river when we chase him off. Because if we just rush right down on him, surround him, and crush him up against the walls, all we're going to do is run him into the city. And said things like, if you want to know how hard a man will fight, give him no way out. Nothing left to lose. You put his back against the wall, and then you'll find out exactly how hard he wants to fight.
Yeah.
So, he understood those things. He understood the psychology of it. And he had even kind of been musing before on how these other men's memories that he possessed filled in his memories smoothly. So before, he had these other thoughts, and he knew they were other men's thoughts, and it would upset him. And now it's so seamless with his own memory that it kind of flows. He has these moments like this when he's looking at the maps of battle, and he starts envisioning it, and he starts getting into, what would happen if you do this and when you do that, and when you press the enemy here, you don't need to flank him over there, and all these things that, this becomes part of Matt's personality. So before, it's almost like all of these old memories are something alien to him that he's still struggling against. Yet, in his mind now, it's becoming his memories. It's becoming, and he knows it isn't, but it's so seamless with him that, it's difficult for him to differentiate between his memories and the other memories that he's inherited.
Yeah, it actually seems to parallel Rand's journey a lot with figuring out his identity, because at this point, or I guess really more so in the next book, he's starting to get these Lews Therin bleed throughs here and there, and he starts to identify them as Lews Therin's voice specifically.
Right.
But Matt here, now that he's got the seamlessness between those men's memories and his own, feels to me a lot like post-integration Rand after his Veins of Gold moment on Dragonmount, when he integrates his own identity with Lews Therin so that there is that seamlessness there. He's able to pull things directly from his LTT memories without it feeling like an alien presence popping back up into himself.
I had not thought of that, but you're right.
These two boys really they should just talk. They're experiencing similar things. They could help each other.
Right. And I think I had said in one of our previous episodes, I don't remember if it was the last episode or the one before that, of how Matt has come to accept his Tavarian nature. And I've come to realize, especially through the story, in some ways he still does not. Mm-hmm. He accepts it when it comes to his luck. If he's going to, try to get the girls out of Tyr, things like that. He accepts that his luck is going to work. Now that he's starting to get an idea in what directions it goes, in the way that chance and random encounters are kind of taken out of his life, and there's a pattern there that he can't force. He just learns to go with it. But at the same time, we have where Rand has been watching him, just some of these recent chapters, and from Rand's mind saying, one of the problems is Matt still fights the Tavarian nature. He said it's much like Sidene. You have to surrender to it in a way before you can use it. You've got to quit fighting the Tavarian pull, and you just got to go with where it takes you. Mm-hmm. And so Rand is musing in his mind how Matt really has not accepted that as far as the way he's going to be pulled and the things he's going to do. And we see that here. He's done with all of this. They're back across the Dragon Wall. I'm going south. All I want is a good tavern, some good wine, some good women, some good music, and let's just enjoy life for a while. And I know I'll have to be there at the last battle, but let's just pray that several years from now, and let me do my thing. And he really wants nothing to do with any of this. Peace out. Y'all save Kyrie, and have fun with that. He's just going his own way. That's his only desire and only thought, because he does not want the battle.
Right.
Unfortunately, though, like you said, he's got these memories. They're integrated in, and the Tavarian nature just does not give him a choice. I can say it now. I can think it. I can plan it. So, yes, I'm going to do it.
Yeah, and his liar curse has been lifted.
Right. I enjoy this perspective from him. The way he arrives at his conclusions, and then the way that Lan tricks him into revealing these things, because you find out later from Rand's perspective, Rand had suspected a lot of this. Mm-hmm. Now he would not tell anybody, not even Lan, where these memories and battle plans and all these kind of things had come from, because that's Matt's story to tell, and Rand is not going to spoil that for him. But I guess in a way he knows that's so private. What happened, beyond the twisted stone doorway is not the kind of thing Matt Cawthon can talk about. It's too private. It's too painful. So I'm just not going there. But he did prod Lan to go, hey, I saw Matt go up into my tent. Why don't you go talk to him and just see if you can lead him to talk about the battle plans? And just glancing at the map for 2 minutes, Matt comes up with the exact same plan that all these hardened battle leaders came up with together over days in talking about what they're going to do. And so it's kind of a test for Rand to see just what Matt's capabilities are, how good a general he's going to be. And plus you get this sadness of Rand planning to use him.
Yes.
Because, hey, I love my friends. I don't want to hurt them. I wish you could have fun and where you go. I hope Perrin has fun in the Two Rivers. I hope he can marry Fael and show her off to his mother and sisters, which was a painful thought, because we the readers know what's happened back in Emmons Field, even though Rand is not. We get all of those thoughts and how it hurts me, but I'm gonna have to use you, and when it's time I'll pull you back, because you've got to be there at the last battle. And Rand knows this, and just that hardness of knowing he's going to use his friends that way. But and that's a sad moment for me, because their friendship can never go back to where it was.
Right. Now that Rand has manipulated him in that way, he knows that straight up asking him isn't going to get him anywhere, and he knows that trying to push him to do anything isn't going to get him anywhere. So he's already been thinking about how he could manipulate him into giving the information that he wanted. And there's really not quite going back from that sort of breach of trust. So this is a pivotal chapter for Rand's development, and someday, if we ever do a Rand season that would take years or whatever, being so much of the series, we'll be able to identify some more of these turning points. But I did notice that for sure. Interestingly, too, about Rand's psyche here is that he says something like, I don't need to get any harder, when he's thinking about how he's using Mat.
Yes.
It doesn't stay that way for long. Pretty soon his mantra changes to, I have to be hard, I have to be hard, I have to have this heart of stone, I need to be steel. I didn't remember this before, where he's actually just starting to regret and think, I don't need to get any worse than that. I need to retain my humanity. And
both of them struggling with these inner changes within them. Again, this is the time when, and when I say this, I mean these chapters here, kind of probably in the last half and last third of the Fires of Heaven, are where Luther and Telemon's voice actually sounds in Rand's head more and more increasingly. He's had these stray thoughts every now and then, things that would just pop in there, but now it's just a voice talking in his head, and he hasn't integrated it yet, but he's still struggling through all that. Still sometimes starting to fight with this, is that really Lutheran, or am I just that mad from the taint on the power? He's got all these identity crisis things to go through, having to be a king. I love that even after Mat had left and talked about the things that would have to happen in the battle and about the siege, and Rand is sitting there thinking, what in the world do miners have to do with a battle?
Yep.
Maybe that was a siege.
I even had to look that up. I'm like, miners in a siege, does that mean what I think it means? And it's just tunneling under the walls. I guess that should have been obvious, but Rand didn't know it and I didn't either.
I mean, it came to my mind pretty quickly, but because I've read a lot of fantasy and a lot of these battle situations in archaic times and around castles and castle walls and things. So Rand didn't have any idea, and he's like, there are no mines, till you get to the mountains. And all, said that has nothing to do with this battle. At least he knows that he doesn't know these things, and he's willing to, talk to the battle leaders and basically let these men come up with the plans, and he will kind of weigh it out, and then he'll ask Lan privately on some of it, what's the more wise course to go, and then he just kind of agrees with the best ideas. But it still hurts that he would use Mat in this way. And Mat even has these twinges of guilt in a way, because he feels sad that he and Rand are parting at this point in his mind, that he's giving up and walking away, and then feels guilty that he feels sad. In a way, he still wants to be that boy with the badger in the sack back in the Two Rivers. He wants to be able to hold on to some of those good times or good memories. But he can't, because Rand is too different, he's too different. And as he said, I think in somewhere, I didn't quote it, but he had almost forgotten for a few days that Rand can channel, and that changes everything.
Yeah.
The fact that you can forget that for a couple of days means it's past time to leave.
Well, when we're thinking about how they're kind of reminiscing, and he does still have this fondness for Rand before he remembers the channeling, it reminds me of when they're having this conversation about Mat leaving. Rand tells him not to tell Egwene, saying that it's just as good as telling an Aes Sedai. And Mat says this about Egwene: she's left Emond's Field further behind than either of us and regrets it less. Right. And then Rand just says maybe, and then gives him the long farewell message. So do you think that's true? Do you think that Egwene is the one who has left Emond's Field behind the most and is the least regretful of them about it?
I don't know that she is, but I think she is from Mat's perspective. That's at least the truth from his mind, because we've seen from some of her dreams when she dreamt of her mother and realizes the loss at leaving, that I'll never go back to Emond's Field. Probably I may never see them again. The heartbreak she feels at that. So, but she has this joy of learning so much. She's learning so much from the Aes Sedai. She's learning so much from the wise ones. She is becoming her own woman in ways that she never dreamt of back in Emmonsfield.
Mm-hmm.
She had kind of dreamt of becoming a wisdom, and I love the way he writes her character. The way she finds such joy in just learning anything and everything. She's just a super sponge of wanting to know it all and wanting to grasp it all just because she loved knowledge that much. I think she, in a way, she may have, but in a way, I don't think she regrets it less than the other two. She knows what she's left behind, but she's just willing to make that choice. Rand knows what he's left behind, but he knows what he's got to do to save Emmonsfield and the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Matt occasionally remembers what he's left behind, but man, that girl has pretty ankles. So we're not
right.
we're not going to worry about Emmonsfield that much right now.
Yeah, so I think you're right that this statement says it speaks to Matt's beliefs about Egwene and maybe not necessarily literally about her character. When we see from her perspective, it seems a little different. This is one of those situations where Matt is pointing with one finger and it has three more pointing back at him, I think.
Yes.
Because I think he has pretty well abandoned Emmonsfield. He thinks the one conversation he has with Perrin about that we covered previously about how he wanted to go back. He was thinking about not quite remembering his sister's faces very clearly and stuff, and worrying about them. But he doesn't spend much time thinking about that kind of stuff. And part of it may have to do with his memory loss. Like maybe a lot of those fond memories are now replaced with a bunch of his ancient battle memories. And maybe that's why he's able to leave it behind pretty easily. But Matt was probably always destined, to Viren or not, to feel like Emmonsfield was a little too small of a small town for him. I think he was going to outgrow it anyway.
Yes. If he had a chance to leave, even not being Ta'veren and everything else, I think he probably would have taken it. Mm-hmm. I could very well see him having taken up with Tom and left the Two Rivers to become a gleeman or something,
Yeah.
Just to, start out as a merchant's guard or something, and then, just keep traveling the world and continue seeing things. And some things you had pointed out in previous episodes, too. So often he was not validated in things, when he and his buddies went traveling up in the mountains of mist, and he found the rock that looked like an ear, and nobody believed him except Tam. Mm-hmm. As much as he loves his family and really cares for them, they never validated him. They always just saw him as the goofball and nothing else. They never saw him as anything else or being able to be anything else. Maybe a horse trader like his dad, but he would always be the goofy one nobody could count on, the rogue of the family. And maybe that's why he tries so hard to be a rogue in so many ways, because that seems to be the only thing they ever expected from him. So, it's a little easier, I think, to leave that behind when you don't have that closeness. You don't have people that validated you, that made you feel loved, and made you feel accepted. They only made you feel tolerated. And they kind of had to have that relationship with Matt, otherwise he would have run all over them as a kid. They had to constantly pull him back and hold him down and restrain him from doing the crazy things that would pop into his head. But because of that, he could never be as close to them as Rand was to his dad, as Perrin to his family, and to all the extended family, the huge aunts and uncles and everybody that lived in the house with them, as this, and of course Master Luhan and the relationship he had with him as an apprentice. So he didn't build those close relationships because anytime he got close to somebody, they were waiting for the trick to happen. They were waiting for him to be up to something.
They didn't take him seriously because he sort of earned that reputation, but it probably does hurt to have that be your main reputation all the time. So I could see that those forces would have led him elsewhere. You combine that with his general restlessness and not wanting to be still and think about himself for long. He's going to get bored easily. So I could see him easily moving on to Baerlon, even if Tom had never showed up. He might have just gone kind of wandering around, past Terran Ferry after a while and stuff. If he'd gotten enough money. Who knows, maybe Whitebridge and Camelin someday would have been a lot slower than in the Eye of the World, I think, but that's what I imagine. And it's funny that you mentioned he could have maybe still gone with Tom and been a gleeman, because he has that agility to be good at the juggling and the acrobatics and stuff, but remember that he was bad at the flute, and Tom just let him quit He wouldn't even let him keep playing because he was the one who was bad at it, and Rand was pretty good and getting better.
Yeah.
I find that interesting, though, that Rand, he still could have been part of something, though, like he could have joined the circus. He would have gotten there eventually.
Oh, yeah. If he had ever met Valen Luca, he would have been.
Yeah, exactly. There. Well, he does eventually, but under very different circumstances.
Well, I meant from the Two Rivers. If
right.
ever happened. Yes, I can definitely see him running away with the circus.
But it's funny that he was not the musical one of the two of them, and Rand was the piper, which kind of fits with the shepherd thing.
Yes.
But he has an ear for music, he says here, and he is one of the more musical people in the series. He's always humming and singing something now. Right. And some of that might have been some of his old memories that kind of came back up. I mean, when you have lived hundreds of lifetimes, I guess you probably had a lot more time to have music training.
Right.
So that's maybe why it seems inconsistent characterization at first, but now I think it's just that he has so many men's memories that he's been exposed to a whole lot more music than most of the rest of the people have.
Right.
And that's why he's able to really read so much into what Asmodean is playing here and stuff.
Right. Yeah, the ironic tone to the music.
Yeah.
And it's kind of funny to me because I don't always pick up on things like that. I love music, but I can't play any kind of music. I can barely play a radio, but I love to listen to music. But sometimes, in fact, my son pointed out to me yesterday about a song that we were listening to, and he said part of that song just sounds feminine. And we went back and listened to it, and it did. But my mind just never went there until he said it. I don't know how feminine notes can be played because there were no voices. It was just notes, just a song without lyrics. But it really did. And, sometimes music can do that, and people who really have an ear for it pick it up before people like me do. But yeah, I think that was cool. It's the ironic sound. And well, why would he be doing that? And not even stopping to think about the lies he just told of, I know nothing about battles and I don't want to know. When in truth, he knows quite a lot about battles. He's just in denial about it.
Yes. Speaking of his inclinations about battles, as we have been doing a lot already, you brought up a couple of times that he knows he has to be there for the last battle, that he and Rand both know that he has a big role to play. Right. And this is the first time that I've ever noticed Matt acknowledge that he's important for the end game.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah, so I think this is an interesting turning point. I'm looking to see how that increases over time. I said several episodes ago, I want to be on the lookout for when he stops being in denial about being important to the pattern and assassins being after him. And I think this is one of those points. He thinks the histories would probably only mention Rand. Small chance he or Perrin would find any place in the stories. And that's also the first time I've ever noticed him concerned about not getting credit for his heroic actions. He's never seemed to care about that before.
Right.
And I don't think he cares about it much still. But, he's already been ruminating in this chapter on not wanting to be a hero. But I think it's only natural to be a little bit resentful on some level of not getting properly credited. He was upset when the girls didn't thank him. And that's not so much that he didn't get big credit that everybody knew he saved them. I think that was more on a personal level. You treated me poorly. I want to be, experience some gratitude from you.
Right.
But I think anybody would probably still, maybe on some level somewhere, want some credit when all this responsibility has been thrust on you and you don't have any choice and you're doing the dirty work for the pattern and your friends and the world. And he doesn't do anything with glory as the goal in mind. That's not something that motivates him.
Correct.
But I think it makes sense that maybe there's a tiny bit of jealousy there that Melindra had been trying to stoke, but he just wasn't in the headspace for it at the time. I don't think Matt normally peels back enough layers of his own thoughts to figure out motivations like that or emotions that he might have. He tends to keep himself very busy with some kind of shenanigans, when there's no battles going on. But I really think all this time to think, just days and days and days of writing since the past to get here, and all this time to think really does have him acknowledging some things that he would not otherwise own up to, like the fact that he is important for the endgame.
Right. Well, and seeing what the Shido have done to prisoners and things made him, want to have less and less to do with this the entire time, because they've just seen this over and over as they've passed towns and farms and different things. Some people just left out there for the buzzards. some hanged from the walls, some burned, all these terrible things that the Shaido have done to the tree killers. And the more of that he's seen, the less he's wanting to follow in Rand's footsteps with this. And I think it's interesting what you said, that he doesn't want to analyze himself too deeply. He's one of the few characters that does analyze his own thoughts. And we see that, oftentimes he'll begin, well, why did I say that? Or, he will analyze his own thoughts, but it's his conclusions that we disagree with. So oftentimes he comes up with the craziest excuses for the things he thinks and says and does.
Yeah. And
we see it as excuses, but he doesn't. To him, that's just one that just makes total sense.
Yeah, I agree. I really like that framing of it. I think instead of peeling back the layers of his consciousness and finding what's really under there, it's almost like he adds a few more with those excuses he points towards.
Yes.
And maybe, it's to protect himself from having to feel these things he does not want to get deeply into. He doesn't want to think about being guilty and sad about leaving Rand. He doesn't want to think about the fact that, he does feel kind of maybe shafted and could deserve a little more credit for everything that he does for the world.
Right. Because, like you said, the thoughts of glory do not motivate him, but after he's done great things, a little appreciation would be nice.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's sort of his thing. That really is not a motivating factor, but after he's done something, that man, why didn't anybody say, good job, Matt?
Right?
He really does. He's the Rodney Dangerfield of the story. He gets no respect, ever.
Seriously.
Yeah, so anyway, that's all I've got with chapter 42. Any other thoughts on it?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, I had a lot of notes on this one. I just loved so much of being in Matt's head for this long. You noted in the way that you talked about this in your synopsis how ironic it is that he was thinking about how he hasn't been benefiting at all from being Taviran. A man ought to be able to find a profit in something like that. Right. Rand certainly had, in a way.
Was so funny to me. All I could do is just quote it because I couldn't find anything to say to add to it. So,
but your tone, the way you read it, I could tell.
So I'll leave that to you as the expert to break that down. Thank you.
This is so ironic because Matt's the only one to have found literal financial profit from being Taviran. Yes. A man ought to be able to find profit in that. You have, Matt. You use it pretty much only for money right now.
Right.
He envies these stories about Taviran people and this power that Rand seems to have of being able to win over enemies or melt the heart of a frigid woman. Yes. But, how does Matt know that he hasn't also been doing those same things? Without his own and Rand's Taviran effects, those High Lords of Tyr never would have played cards with him. They would have been his enemies and tried to kill him. But they soon became loyal followers. Could also have something to do with why the Aiel are cool with him and why he has an Aiel girlfriend, which is a pretty dangerous thing to mess around with for a Wetlander who has no idea how their culture works.
Right, a maiden of the spear, no less. Not just an Aiel girlfriend, but an Aiel warrior girlfriend. Yes.
He's walking around just dressed in all this fancy embroidery and lace, jingling with all this unimaginable amount of gold he's got on his person all the time.
Yes.
But, I could see his point of complaining that he hasn't gotten much out of this, even though he has, because, if I had died for being Taviran, I'd probably be kind of sour about how it all kind of balanced out. I would think that maybe that's not worth it. Maybe I need to get more out of this deal.
Good point. And people are looking at Rand as a king now.
Yeah.
Especially in Tyr and Kyrian. Well, we'll be in Kyrian once we've gone through a few chapters here. And he really has a little of that envy of, well, why does Rand get to be the one to be treated like a king? But then anytime anyone tries to treat him like he's something special, he runs from it.
Yeah.
So he really doesn't want that, or I don't know, it's so complex. And that's one of the things you love about Matt. I can only unpack this so far, and I really don't understand all of his motivations there, because he seems to be jealous that these things are not happening, yet when they do, he denies it. He doesn't want anything to do with it. As you said, the way he's been enriched by this, but he kind of denies that too. Well, I'm just lucky it dies. Other than that, it's never benefited me at all. And all the duties and responsibilities of being a Taviran, but never the pleasure. And I like that he chose that word. It's like no matter what he gets, he's never really satisfied with it. It's never enough. The old saying of, how much is enough? And the answer is always a little more.
Okay, so Matt's attitude here of this contradictory attitude of well, I don't want glory, but like I do at the same time. Like I would love a little appreciation and some riches, but if somebody tries to treat him like somebody important, he runs away, like you said. This contradiction reminds me a lot of a passive-aggressive partner who takes on a lot of responsibility for housework or something and maybe complains about, oh, I do all this and it's such a thankless job and nobody ever appreciates it. But then if somebody were to jump in and ask, can I do anything for you? No.
Right.
No, I'll do it. They'll huff and puff about it and do the dishes anyway instead of letting anybody else take over. Because then if they didn't do it, they wouldn't have anything to complain about, right? If they actually let other people shoulder part of the burden. They wouldn't be able to be passive aggressive about it.
Ooh, that is so cool. I never saw that kind of parallel about this, but yeah, that is spot on.
I don't think he's taking on extra responsibilities in the way that kind of partner was that I was saying, but it's still that contradictory attitude. It just feels that way to me. There's this passive aggression there.
Yeah. No matter what happens, I'm going to find a way to complain about it.
Yeah. And I've got one more note on this chapter. It happens in this chapter and in just about any of them that Matt's been in while we've been in the Threefold Land, which we've only just come out of. We've seen Matt noticing the wise ones, Moiraine, Egwene, and Aviendha staring at him a lot. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, he gets a similar vibe from Jason Natail or Asmodean here in the tent. He gets this feeling that he's looking at him and can see into his soul or tell if he's wearing clean underwear or not, like you said about the wise ones. Yes. So I think, with Asmodean there, he's probably unconsciously picking up on the fact that the guy can channel because he gets this feeling from channelers staring at him a lot. Right. And he compares Jason's stare to theirs, to the Aes Sedai and wise ones. So what do you think about this? Why are they staring at him? Or are they? Is Matt just paranoid? Are they really looking at him this much? And if they are, what's it about?
I don't know. I always picked up on it as him being just a little bit paranoid that, anytime they looked at him and didn't say anything, his mind is going to all of the things he's guilty of, basically. Sort of like the trick I used to use with my daughters occasionally when they were young. They come home and we could say, just tell me what happened at school today and you'll be in less trouble. I didn't know a thing. I was like, yeah, you sound like you're familiar with that trick. Yes. For all of our listeners, yes, Lajara is one of these daughters I'm speaking of. So, and yeah, you would just start spilling your guts. Oh, how'd you find out? Oh, because you just told me, dear. So, and I feel like, now I may be wrong, but I feel like that's kind of Matt's thing. If somebody's just staring at him, and they may just be intrigued by him, they may just be thinking, wow, he is the dragon's best friend here, the Karakarn's best buddy is really cool. But they look at him with that cold Aiel expression or the wise woman expression or Aes Sedai measuring, weighing, how can I use this person? And immediately his mind goes to, oh gosh, they know about this and this and this, and and like he said, whether or not you get on clean underwear, it seems like they weigh you and measure you in those glances. So I think it's more his guilty conscience, if you would, but I may be wrong, because I know he's certainly the one to deny that he has a guilty conscience over anything. Yeah. And so he would never stop to think that that's why, he comes to these conclusions. But then again, it may be very similar to back at Emmons Field. People always suspected Matt was up to something because Matt really was usually up to something.
Exactly. So, he's like, why are people staring at me? And it is usually because he's doing something weird. There's something to stare at him about, or there's something unusual about him here. So I think there's a combination. I really like how you pointed out the fact that he has enough of a guilty conscience that he's going to feel much more scrutinized than he even is. And I didn't really frame it that way. I really like that characterization. His thinking could be on track in that, Aes Sedai, it's the kind of thing they would do to study somebody and figure out how they could use them. So there's probably some of that going on. I think they're probably also curious about what happened in Rhuidean, since he came out with stuff he didn't go in with. They went in naked, and he comes out with this spear. And they probably also saw his scar on his neck. He covers it up all the time now, but somebody had to have seen that. I'm sure there was somebody to greet them when they came out of Rhuidean. Moiraine has to know about his importance now because she's been to Rhuidean. So she knows his importance to her own story. Yes. And the wise ones, they've got a stake in this too, because this wetlander went into their sacred city. They made him take all his weapons away, and they weren't even fully on board with doing this anyway, but like, okay, the Karakarn is here, I guess we have to, break some rules now. And so he comes back, and it seems like he might have broken the peace of Rodion. He was armed there, presumably. They don't know where he got the spear. They didn't they didn't really follow that line of questioning, because Couladin started yelling and starting trouble, like, oh my god, you killed my brother in there and stuff. So that never got resolved. And so that could be one reason they're staring at him. They've got to be curious. What is this dude's deal? And he's also got respect from Aiel warriors. So, they probably look at him in appreciation.
Right.
But from the wise ones, I think it's more, they see him as potentially dangerous to their culture. He went into Rodion, and that's not supposed to happen. And he might have done stuff there he wasn't supposed to do. They have no way of knowing.
Right.
And, I also think this may be a way of seeing that Matt's perceptions may not be all that accurate. And because he does feel some of a guilty conscience or something, right, he feels he's being stared at.
Yeah. And the only people that is recorded that they talked about Rodion to is when Matt told Jason the tale. He never told him about the twisted stone doorway.
Right.
But he's the only one that is recorded that I can think of where they talked about what happened in Rodion. Other than that, they didn't speak of it. They kept basically to the Aiel custom of, hey, what happens in Rodion stays in Rodion. So we don't talk about that. We don't discuss that. And of course, Rand blurts out to the entire Aiel nation about the history of the people of the Aiel. But as far as this is what I saw and this is what happened to me, if anybody told anything else, it was off screen and we don't know about it.
Yep. And that's all I had about Matt. I have a teeny tiny bit about Rand, actually, to sort of lead us into chapter 43, if that's okay. I never really saw Matt's impending fight with Couladin coming on my first read through.
No.
But, you assume Rand's going to have to be the one who does some kind of showdown with him. And then,
right,
in this chapter, Lan and the maidens pulled him away from that. They both had some really good points that they used to argue with. Lan had some logical points. The maidens had spear points. And
yes,
they pushed him away from this idiot plan of risking the Karakarn and the Dragon Reborn's life to fight this guy with his sword instead of just using his better tools of the power. Exactly. And, they convince him, let the big boys and girls who've been training with their whole lives to handle this sword fighting and spears and stuff, let them do this. I thought that was really cool. It's really unusual in epic fantasy that the hero doesn't have the big showdown with the person who seems to be the big bad at the time. Couladin is our main villain right now, and the fact that he dies so soon, so anticlimactically, you don't really know what's going to come next.
Exactly, because you suspect that's the entire build up, the focus of the book is that showdown, and at the end, he pulls off some big miraculous win over the bad guy, and Jordan did a great job of letting you think that, and then surprise, reach for it now. That's not at all what this book is about.
Especially for this to be 5 books deep in epic fantasy. You assume at this point that, especially when you don't know how many books there are going to be back when they were first coming out, you got to imagine as a first-time reader that this has got to be zooming in pretty close to the last battle, like maybe another book or 2. And so you would expect that this is going to be one of Rand's leveling up moments before he gets there or something. And he just completely blindsides you with that. I love it. And it's also a tiny germ of Rand's realization that he has to come to when he is in the last battle, in the cave in Sheol Ghul, that other people can be heroes too. When Egwene's voice and many other voices have to break through to him to say that, and that he needs to let other people make sacrifices for him. It's not all on him, and it would be arrogant and foolish for him to expect that be the case. So he has to cede that control of the whole, pattern leading towards the last battle to other key players that have to be around him. And I think that's a really cool piece of his character development here.
Right.
He's kind of forced into it, but he's going to have to realize it for real later.
He has to realize you can't weave a carpet with one thread.
It takes
many of them, yes. So, but he's got to come to that realization. And really, his level up moment here is the realization that the general doesn't fire a lot of shots, and he's the general right now.
Yeah.
Now he's got things he's got to do, and all that's very important. But in this type of battle, The general rarely ever fires a shot. He directs those people who are going to fire the shots.
Yep. He needs to lead from behind.
Right. And that's difficult for him. And I love the advice that Lan gave him, which basically where the maidens were being stubborn and not letting him out of his tent, basically, or not out of that area to go fight. And Lan's advice is something to the effect: have you ever seen a woman give up on something? Have you ever seen her change her mind on anything like this? And of course, they're surrounded by hundreds of them.
Right.
Your best bet is to go with them. Yeah, that's very good advice. So.
I think so. Yeah. And I think that leads us pretty well into chapter 43, This Place, This Day. This chapter begins with a Rand point of view in which he gets escorted by the maidens to the observation tower instead of finding his way toward a duel with Couladin. From the tower, he, Avienda, and Egwene channel to harry the Shido out of their hiding places. Then we switch to Matt's perspective. He's sneaking south through the woods to try to leave Cairhien altogether. There's a large group of Aiel coming towards him from the south. He does not want to be spotted. He already got nicked by an arrow earlier. Even if these are Rand's Aiel and not Shido, they may not recognize him, so he takes care and heads deeper into the woods and veers west, thinking to go around them to be able to eventually go south, kind of along the river. He's thinking about how things were going so well just 2 hours ago when he left. Melindra had left on some job with the maidens, seemingly conflicted about something. As soon as she left the tent, Matt packed up his saddlebags, mounted Pips, and, quote, ghosted away to the south, end quote. Unfortunately, some of the clans following Rand had split up and moved south of him to push Couladin north, just as Matt had recommended in the last chapter. Even more unfortunately is that the presence of those forces to the south is pushing Matt west towards the river Alguenia and towards the fighting. He climbs a hill and he finds more men in his way. This time, Cairhienin and Terran forces who came from the city. As soon as they march out of the way, he'll have a clear route to the south. And they cannot get out of the way soon enough for his liking because Matt does not want to stop again until he's halfway to the River Aranin, which I checked on a map, and that looks to be about 200 or more miles west of the Alguenia that he's currently approaching. So he is going to be off into the next state or two before he stops again. He sees movement to the northeast of the Cairhienin and Terrans, and he pulls out his spyglass to check. He finds Aiel looking to surprise the Wetlanders. This looks like it's about to get really ugly, but it's none of Matt's business. He needs to be on his way. The Wetlanders are in a valley, and the Aiel have the high ground. There's some scouts kind of hiding on these hills, and then Matt realizes there's probably a big ambushing force behind these two hills, waiting to close in on the Wetlanders as they come through the valley, through this pass. Neither group can see each other right now, though. But the Aiel appear to be expecting the others, or else they wouldn't just be waiting there kind of randomly on the chance somebody would come through. So they got these scouts waiting for the first sign of the Terrans who are in the front approaching. Before he knows it, he finds himself galloping Pips down the slope to warn them of the trap. He just can't leave them to their deaths, after all. Just warn and then be on his way. That's the plan. He rode at the Cairhienin officers first, commanding them in the name of the Lord Dragon that they halt there, sprinkling in a few gory threats about what Rand will do to them with the One Power if they don't obey. They do obey, but they look confused. The Terrans, who are marching in front and therefore at greater risk of alerting the Aiel to their presence, do not comply so nicely. Their leader is outraged. The dragon himself gave me these orders. And then Estion, who Matt had played cards with back in the day, shows up and intervenes, looking the worse for wear. He whispers in the Terran leader's ear a little bit to let him know who Matt is and what's going on. So then the Terran commander, Melunril of House Azagora, introduces himself, apologizes, and asks how he may serve the Lord Dragon. He still doesn't seem happy about it, though. And Estion flat out asks what's on everybody's minds. Why should we have to sit here and wait around instead of getting to fight the Aiel, like everybody else is getting to do? At this point, because they had turned around to face Matt, the whole column of Terrans has their back turned to this valley pass where the Aiel wait to trap them. They're now in view of the Aiel scouts because they had kept moving a little bit while Matt was on his way to them. But they don't know that yet. They don't know that the Aiel could see them. Matt knows that those fools would charge ahead without rhyme or reason if they knew that they were spotted already. The commander is inexperienced, and the men look like most of them have never fought beyond a tavern brawl, so he doubts he could do anything to turn them back now or do much to keep a semblance of order in their ranks. But he explains what awaits them, and the fools cheer, excited at the prospect of seeing some action and killing some Aiel. Mat has to shout for them not to look behind them and to keep their eyes on him. They comply out of fear of Rand, he thinks. If he were not friends with Rand, these fools would ride him over in their eagerness to kill the so-called savages. He orders them to walk calmly into the valley, and then use the pikemen to create a hollow square inside which the cavalry will stay until the time is right. They balk at this, though. It seems cowardly to hide from the enemy like that, but Mat insists. They'll get to charge eventually, but they just need to wait until it's safer to do so. Darid, who is the seasoned Kyrian commander of the pikemen, patiently listens to Mat's orders, and he seems to find them reasonable. It seems that he's going to obey, anyway. And then Mat rides south and west away from the pass and the waiting Aiel, hoping that they're going to think he was just a messenger on his way until he is out of their view, which, interestingly, Mat was just telling himself that's all he was, so let's see what happens next. The Kyrianen were right where he had left them when he stopped them earlier. Their leader, Talmanis of House de Lovinda, listens patiently and seems to find the strategy sound. He agrees to lead half the forces, as Mat commands, if Mat himself will lead the other half, and he extends a hand to shake on the deal. Mat freezes for a moment, thinking, quote, I'm a gambler, not a soldier, a lover, end quote. He could leave right now and let the Kyrianen also turn around right now and leave while the Terrans get roasted on the spit that Mat had just put them on. But instead, he finds himself shaking Talmanis' hand. Talmanis apportions half his forces to Mat, and he takes his own forces west behind Mat and company. Mat reflects on all the small decisions that led him here, and he just hopes Talmanis will be there when he said he would be. The guy didn't even ask who Mat was, after all. So he follows the valley northeast and notices rain clouds gathering north, and he feels wind, and all these could actually bode pretty good conditions for the battle and for the farmers later, too. He hears the fighting up ahead before he sees it, and he notices a few more things when he does get in view of the skirmish. Talmanis is following him, so cool, just like he said he would, and the pikemen did make the hedgehog, the hollow square, just as he ordered it. The formation is doing its job pretty well. They are losing some spearmen, but every time they do, they close the shield walls around them. The onslaught of the Shido doesn't show any sign of stopping, though, and there's more bad news. Only half of the Terran lords are inside the hedgehog like he ordered. Melanril and his single remaining bannerman at that point get cut down right before Mat's eyes. Good riddance. Mat yells some old-tongue orders and some curses, but his forces get the gist of what he's trying to say. He and Talmanis take the hills to either side of the valley, and they charge downward with cavalry, crashing right into the unsuspecting Shido from behind. Quote, it was then that the lightning began to fall, and after that, things really got hairy. End quote. Thus ends chapter 43, This Place, This Day.
This is one of those moments that stuck out in my mind from my first read-through. First time I ever picked up the Fires of Heaven, oh gosh, however many years ago. Not long after it was published, and it's one that really sticks with you. It's one that, to me, has always defined Mat, of jumping in there, leading the men, proving what a great general he was, not just standing in Rand's tent pointing at the maps, but actually in there with the men, and not wanting to be there. The way he's tried so hard to get out of this, and the Ta'veren pull, the pattern, didn't keep him from leaving Rand, but it still twisted him around and warped until he's right where he needs to be.
Yep.
Because this battle or not just this skirmish of the battle, but the entire battle could have gone very differently. Because you remember, they held back about half their forces because they had double the number of people that the Shido had. But they didn't want to commit all of them at once because they didn't know what would happen if the Shido circled around and flanked them. Right. They didn't know what would happen with the other clans behind them. So, they're only committing about half their forces. So it's pretty much an even battle at this point. And the Aiel are better warriors than the Tyrants and the Kyrian. They just are.
Yeah. I mean, these folks don't have a standing army. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. So, yeah, at this point, this would not have been a fair battle. All of these wetlanders would have died in this battle had Matt not interceded, and he knew that.
Mm-hmm.
But just the whole way though that he's sitting there musing on. Every time I try to head south, there's another column of Aiel here, and I've got to avoid them. And the only direction to go is to circle a little bit to the west, and the west, and the northwest, and the northwest. And the harder he's tried to get away from the battle, the more he's drawn right into the thickest parts of it.
Yep.
And the way it continues on, of course, for the next few chapters, we'll study next episode. But yeah, I just love that about the way Jordan worked that in. Him just, I'm trying to run away. And he can't do that. He cannot do that.
I like that you noted it shows what a great general he is as far as a leader. Not only can he puzzle out good strategy on the map, like you said, but he adapts when things don't go according to plan. He knew that was going to be the case, that no battle plans survive first contact with the enemy, or after the first arrow flies, or however it was exactly that he put it, and he finds a lot of people here that weren't where they were supposed to be. Now, some of them were. I find it interesting, actually, that he thinks he can just mosey on south without coming into contact with any of those, because he was one of the people who suggested, let's split up your forces and put more of these south so they can come up behind the shadow and push them north to this river. He should not have expected the south to be clear if he knew that people were going to follow those battle plans.
Right. It's almost as if he expected them to do the exact opposite of what he said, because that may have been a lot of Matt's experience in life.
Yeah.
If he gives advice, people, okay, yeah, let's do the other thing instead. So it's almost like he was surprised. And he did notice some of his own strategies here. Now, in all fairness, we're allowed to see that Ruark and the other battle chiefs among the Aiel had also basically had the same plan.
True.
He just, amazingly understood it in seconds, what it took them days to kind of work out and plan for. But yeah, he did look at it, well, that was pretty much what I told them to do, what they should do. But he didn't expect to get caught and trapped in all of that. And just the little touches, like he pulls out the spyglass, and I don't remember but the guy's name.
Kintovir. I love that name. That one sticks with me for some reason. It's a great fantasy name.
Yeah. Yes, Kintovir loved to play at dice. It just, he doesn't even have to relive the moment. We understand the moment because we've had so many of those Matt moments. Just that one sentence is all you need to
absolutely
understand why he's carrying such a precious thing around.
That's another one of his cool off-screen interactions that we don't get to see, but he just casually refers to it in his memory, and you're like, wow, that would have been a hilarious thing to watch. Just like in last episode when he had called Nyla short, basically, but calling her a pretty little flower, and he has another one of those in this chapter. It's not quite as funny. He has this off-screen witness to Melindra when she's leaving to go be part of the maidens who go to bully Rand into getting on the tower. And so it's not so much an interaction, but he does hear her arguing with herself. And I think this is a clever tool of making him just remember it instead of us actually living through it, because if we had heard her actual words, we would have been far more suspecting of her ultimate betrayal. And so this subtle, partial revelation, I think, is really useful. It gives us enough clues that we probably could have put it together, but it doesn't slap us in the face with it, and I like that about it.
Yes. And it's just, it's part of the intrigue with Matt. It's part of one of the things that want more of him. But since he's not the main protagonist of the story, we have more off-screen moments, it seems like, than we do on-screen moments. So you get a lot of those. And it's odd. I think it's part of the genius of Robert Jordan to be able to write with a different voice for each character. And not only a different voice, but this different history.
Right.
You don't see a lot of off-screen moments with the other characters, but you see it a lot with Matt. So you just get an entirely different feel when you fall into a Matt chapter or a Matt section of a chapter, because you have those little moments like that. I love, and you've pointed this out before, how he does this. Sometimes he's weighing out different options, and he doesn't realize what he's decided to do until he started doing it. And we have that exact thing in this chapter here where he's trying to decide, man, I want to leave, and I know they're going to die. They're not my responsibility. I don't know any of these people. And the next thing he knows, just like Pips is taking off down the slope. And he's like, what am I doing? So he had not even arrived at his conclusion yet, but subconsciously part of him had. And he arrived at his conclusion by kicking the horse and, making it go. And that's when he realized, well, now I'm committed. I've got to do this. I'm just going to warn them. And the more he tells himself, I'm just going to warn them. Okay, let me turn this group up. They've already been seen. So let me kind of tell them what to do, and then I'm just going to fade, and they can they'll have a fighting chance. And no, the more he talks, the more he's enmeshed in it, and it gets to the point really where when Talmanis reaches out to shake his hand and say, "I'll lead this group if you'll lead that one." That's the point where Matt consciously makes the decision to be part of the battle. And that's such a growth moment for me, because it's almost as if he is accepting the fact, okay, the pattern is not going to let me leave. It's not going to let me get out of this. It's not going to keep me from leading men. So, let's just do it. Screw it. Let's get in the middle of a battle. Why not? We've done everything else today, and we can't seem to get out of it. So, let's fight.
Here's another factor that I didn't think he thought through super well. Like, it can be forgiven that he didn't expect those forces to have actually been split up and sent south like he expected. But he also didn't really think through how dangerous it might be to try to ghost Melindra. He was just going to leave and never see her again. Like, I don't think you can do that with a Maiden of the Spear. I don't think you walk away.
Well, now, if I remember correctly, we get more of him in upcoming chapters.
I guess he hasn't had time to process that yet.
He basically gets out of it. Yeah, because she doesn't know. And that's the reason he ghosted. Because if he had just told her, bye, I probably won't be here when you get back. Have a nice time killing Shido or whatever. She is Shido, but anyway, that would have been like the most dangerous thing for him to have done. I think at that point she would have killed him rather than let him leave. But
I don't think there's a safe exit strategy.
No. Right. No, technically looking back on it, the most dangerous thing he could do is tell her Rand's plans. But second to that is telling her goodbye. And probably the least dangerous option would be to ghost.
That's fair.
Just vapor out of there, because then you don't have to have that confrontation if you can get a couple of 100 miles away. And he wasn't really sure that she could run down his horse. He didn't want to find out, but if he could get far enough away, he didn't think that she could catch him. But that just did not work out that way.
Nope.
Oh, and you see the 60s influence in Robert Jordan, because he would have been coming of age in the 1960s.
Yeah, he was a boomer for sure, right?
with his statement through Matt, I'm a gambler, I'm a lover, and it just, immediately my mind went to the old 60s phrase, I'm a lover, not a fighter.
Yep, same.
You see he worded it different because it's a different world, he had to, but it's that same thing, and I loved that. That was woven into the story so well.
Yeah, his generational placement, I think, shows through in his writing quite a bit. Obviously, there's his experience in Vietnam being a huge influence on many parts of the series. But also the Tuatha are like hippies, basically. Yes. They're the Vietnam protesters.
Right, the wild, colorful clothing in the piece. I can see that.
Yeah, they're vegetarians. They got all of it.
Yes.
So I did notice that phrase. I'm like, oh, that sounds surprisingly 20th century, but I didn't really place it quite in that generational context. That makes perfect sense. I've just got like one more note on this chapter that corresponds to something that I mentioned in previous episodes. So in our season 2, episode 9, I went on that long rant about, when we were covering the Shadow Rising and Matt was playing cards with these guys that end up in the Band of the Red Hand later.
Yes.
And my conclusion was these are bad dudes, but then they're like his buddies later on. That seems weird and doesn't quite sit right with me. So now, we're following up with some of these guys for the first time since that card game. I think Estion's really the only one. And then, we're going to see more of them in upcoming chapters. Yeah. I think that seeing that some of these Terran lords have been through some stuff, it seems like they have seen some things since he last saw them. They've seen some difficult fighting. It was implied that Estion might have been tortured. He was questioned by Aiel about what Rand's plans might be. Right. And so the fact that they have experienced these things, presumably the others might be a little beat up too when we see them in the next upcoming chapters. I can't remember. But I could see that maybe the fact that they've been through some stuff is supposed to help redeem them for the reader somewhat. and explain why they seem to be just like some of the boys later, and we don't really think about the fact that they were part of this oppressive force in Tyr. I don't think I agree that these things that they've been through would redeem them from whatever crimes they committed as members of the violent, oppressive ruling class of Tyr. But I could see where others might think that, or at least where you could kind of argue that. You know, so I remembered it as, you know, they're playing cards with Matt, and then they're in the band, and I didn't really remember what happened in between, if anything. And so far, there's barely this little step here. We see that they're more beat up. They have probably grown somewhat somehow. So I think it's worth noting that since I spent so much time ranting about it in a previous episode, and I said I wanted to keep an eye out on this progression, I want to watch a little bit more for any character change I see in some of the others and what the narrative seems to suggest that we should feel about them. Like, is the story and the writing trying to influence us to be a little more sympathetic to them now?
Right. And I think it is. You know, my first time through the story, I don't think I even picked up that Estion was one of the young lords in Tyr, you know, when Matt,
Me neither.
the bubble of evil came up. And even though Jordan kind of hits you in the face with it, he says it 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, and this guy is the only person described as potato-faced. You'd think that would stand out.
Yes. But you see him, you know, before in Tyr, he was not one of the worst ones, of course, but he was one of the men that taking advantage of, you know, Miller's daughter or whatever. You know, nobody knows, nobody cares. Why would Rand make such a big deal of these things? They were spoiled brats, and they had been raised to be spoiled brats. They had been raised to expect that kind of life and to be able to treat people that way. And now, you know, Estion, he's the only one of the leaders there anyway of the Tyrian group to have a dented breastplate. So he's already seen some action, already seen some fighting. He's grown up a lot. And before, he and the other lords were tolerant of Matt because Matt was the friend of the Lord Dragon. They didn't like Rand. They did not like that he was the Dragon Reborn. They did not like that Tyr had fallen to him. So they were very resentful and hateful. And they were just tolerating Matt because Matt was Rand's friend. Now, you see, after Estion has seen some things, and at the end of this chapter and the end of some following chapters, the more he's around Matt, the more he sees Matt as his own man. The more he sees Matt as a military genius. The more he sees Matt as, hey, this guy knows what he's doing. And I want to be like this guy. I want to follow this guy. I will dedicate myself to this guy because of who he is and how he saved my life and the other lives. So, you know, he's done a lot of growing up and maturing, been battle hardened. And again, that does not excuse the previous behavior. But in our minds, we would like to think that after the last battle and the people who can go home do go home, maybe some of these previous spoiled brat tyrant lords now know a thing or two. Now they go home with a different perspective, and now maybe they raise their sons to be different men. Because again, nothing can actually undo what we've done in the past. You know, you can pay a debt to society. You can try to make amends for previous errors and erroneous ways of living, but you can't actually go change it. But what you can do is you can change what the next generation is going to do. You know, we can either propagate things like, you know, racism and sexism and all the other isms in the world, or we can stop it and say, you know, I can't change what I've done in my past, but I can make sure my children don't make those same mistakes. Now they're going to go on to make their own terrible mistakes because that's human nature, but we can put an end to many of those things with our attitudes and what we do. Even though we can't go back and erase what we've done, we can make sure it doesn't carry on to the next generation. Now, again, we don't know that. This is just my complete speculation. I just pulled that out of the air during this conversation. But I would like to think that because before we saw that we didn't like these snot-nosed brats, and now it's written in such a way we're beginning to gain a little respect for them because they're growing into different people than who they used to be.
Yeah, so, I get that perspective. I like that framing. And yeah, I do think the narrative is sort of probably is framing it that way for sure. I don't have to be on board that like I would want to hang out with these guys, but I could see how we're contributing to building a better Tyr in the future, or a better, we don't know what these borders are going to look like, so a better Westlands.
Yes.
Yeah, we don't know where these guys are going to end up.
I do like some of the things that Rand did to try to move that direction, though. You know, one of the first things in Tyr is to, you know, the lords apply equally. He did the Magna Carta.
Yeah.
The law is going to apply to everybody. And yeah, we'll hang a lord just like we'll hang a criminal, any other criminal, I should say.
Yeah.
That was a shock to them because it was so different. But again, that's trying to set up a society based on laws, not on whims. And we all desire that. We don't always achieve it, and there's different ways of trying to find that in government. But that's something we all want. We all want a certain fairness in life. Even though I've said for years, the fair is something that comes around twice a year. They have carnival rides and games. Life is not really fair, but still we have a desire to see fairness in life.
Yeah, we should still aim for justice.
And we find out in today's chapter, moving forward, even if you say it in the old tongue, as long as you make that hand motion and start your horse, everybody knows what you mean.
Yep.
They don't have to hear you. Oh, there's another Matt moment I liked. Is after he does it, he realized that was the old tongue, but well, everybody knew what I meant, and they did.
Yep. And then after that, the only other thing he yells are cuss words, and they still, nobody can hear him at that point. The battle is so loud, but everybody's still following along.
And you do see, at least Jordan's perspective on stupidity in war. Those who are too stupid to see his plan and follow along, they get killed off very quickly.
Yeah.
Now, some good men die too, because every plan falters. The enemy has this weird way of not doing what you want them to do because they don't want to die. And,
right?
And you have to make them do that. Matt is, he's so flexible in this. His plans change in the middle of battle, whatever it takes. But anybody who's smart enough to key in on that and listen to that has a chance at living. Nothing's guaranteed in battle, but he has a chance where they did not have it before. I love and respect these kind of changes in Matt, that from the time he gripped Talmanus' hand until the end of this battle, he was committed to staying in the fight. Now, before and after, yeah, he's ready to ghost. But during that time, once he made that decision, it's kind of like we said before, when he really gives you his word and he's looking you in the eye, he will follow through with it. We saw that again in this chapter.
Those are about all the thoughts I have for this chapter. Did you have anything else before we close it out?
So much, but I think that's enough to cover, because I already bore people and drive them to distraction with my talking. So I hope you all will join us next week as we finish up the book, The Fires of Heaven, with a look into chapters 44, 45, and 51.
Subscribe to Wheel of Mind on Podbean, Stitcher, Google Play, Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, and that one's under the name Lajaradain instead, to get notified when a new episode drops. For links to our website, email, and social media, visit our link tree at linktr.ee/Lojara, and leave us some feedback by rating and reviewing on your preferred podcast listening platform, or by contacting us through email at lajaradain@gmail.com, at Twitter at Lojaroseti, or on our website through the Contact Me form. And this is not the ending, but it is an ending to the Wheel of Mind.
Thanks, everybody. Live long and prosper.
So I have a quick correction from something I had asked about last week. We were talking about what the Aiel do with their dead, and neither of us could remember. I had some weird idea, I don't know where I got this, that they just sort of left him out, almost like a sky burial. Don't think that's true. I put out a help signal on Twitter, and at that Ashaman, which is run by Joan Albright, and at Shireen Sayadun, who is in their bio they say Farron of Society Sayadun and Clan Shireen, both supplied the answer. So they said that the Aiel bury their dead upright, facing east. Joan quoted it from A Crown of Swords chapter 2, in which they're kind of surveying the aftermath of Dumai's Wells, and it says, quote, 1,000 Aiel buried standing upright to face each sunrise. I have heard of some Christian traditions doing this. Now, facing east, I think, is probably a lot more common than the standing upright, but I have heard of the standing upright so that the folks could more easily ascend and walk with their new heavenly bodies when they have been resurrected on Judgment Day. I don't know where I've heard that, but it was immediately familiar to me that I knew that somebody has done that somewhere in some Christian tradition.